And welcome to the Metropolitan Planning Organization, a part of Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. Could I have a motion to accept the minutes from November 28th?
So move, Mr. Chair.
Roll call with that?
Yes, I would be, I'll do the minutes first, and then we have any corrections or omissions, then you do the roll call and they'll approve it.
Thank you.
Is there a second? There's a second. Any corrections or omissions from anyone in the room? Anyone calling in that sees corrections or omissions on the minutes? Sylvia, we're good to go. For
All
the
right.
approval and the roll call.
All right, the last one of this year. From Bedford Online, we have Bill Jean.
Present, yes.
Thanks, Bill. No one yet from Candy. Oh, yes, Hooks it just walked in. Let's see, these are the exciting things we live for. Chester in the room, we have Andrew Haddock. Sorry, Andrew.
Present, yes.
And Deb Munson.
Present and yes.
I'm gonna try to time this as you just take a bite, so. Deerfield, we have Fred McGarry.
Present and yes.
Great to see Fred. We have Errol Rhodes.
Present and yes.
Thanks, Errol. Derry, we have online John O'Connor.
Here and abstain.
Thanks, John. We have Richard Tripp in the room.
Present and yes.
Thanks, Richard. From Francistown, we have Gary Schneckenberg in house.
Present, yes.
And from no one from Goffstown yet, but I'm not giving up on that. We may come back to that. Hooks it. We have Denise Pitchett Folk.
Sylvia, Jacob.
Oh, snuck online. Sorry, there you go.
That's okay.
Jacob.
Present and yes.
Thanks, Jacob. That's a different color highlighter. 1 second. Okay, so we do have Goffstown online. Thank you. Londonderry, we have Art Rugg in the room.
Present and yes on the minutes.
Anybody else sneak in while I wasn't looking?
John O'Connor snuck in.
Oh, no, he's been in a while and we've already
Sorry,
done.
Jeff Moulton,
Jeff Moulton.
upper right from Derry.
Jeff Moulton from Derry. How say you, Jeff? On the minutes.
Here and yes.
Thanks, Jeff. Okay, and I'm gonna come back to. From Manchester, we have the trio, Peter Capano,
Anything check me, present, yeah.
Ray,
Yeah.
Ray Clement, and Dan O'Neill.
Here and yes.
Thank you so much. No one yet from New Boston, or where, from Wyndham, we have Peter Griffin, our chair,
Yeah,
and Ed Lapointe.
Here and yes.
And we're gonna jump back. Thanks, Ed. Thanks for being here. And from Francistown, we have our friend Linda Kuhnhart.
Present and yes.
Thank you. Did I, oh, well, and just to acknowledge also, of course, from DOT, we have Lucy St. John online.
Good afternoon, everyone. I abstain.
And thanks, Lucy, and non-voting, but let's just recognize Vanessa Partington.
Morning, thank you.
All right. Oh, and we also have Craig Tufts, I see, from Central Regional Planning Commission.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Craig. And anyone else I may have missed, speak now or forever hold your peace.
Hi, Sylvia. Jennifer from Francistown is here, present and abstain.
Oh, thank you. It's Jennifer Badney. So good to see a black spot there with your name. Okay. Oh, great.
do we have any old business?
Linda,
I don't think so.
thank you.
Okay, moving right along, could we have an update on the fiscal year 2025 to 2034 10-year transportation improvement plan? Nate is going to be presenting from afar.
Yes, and I've just.
Yes,
made-
I am presenting from afar today. The rainstorm caused some problems at my house that are requiring my attention over the last 18 hours or so. So sorry I couldn't be there with you in person today. I'm gonna give a brief update on the 10-year plan. Now, let's see. Nope. Yeah. Okay. Can everybody see this in full screen mode?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So just when we last reviewed the 10-year plan, we reviewed it in detail around the time the GASSET hearings were happening around the state in September and October. Some significant developments have happened since then. So I wanted to just sort of take a few minutes this morning and walk through briefly what has changed in the 10-year plan since we last reviewed it. So just as a reminder, the GASSET, the Governor's Advisory Commission on Intermodal Transportation, held 24 public hearings around the state this fall. We had 2 of those in our region, one in September in Londonderry and one in October in Goffstown. Following all of those public hearings around the state, GASSET held 2 deliberative meetings in Concord in the governor's chambers in November to review all of the public comments that were received through those hearings, make certain adjustments based on those public comments, and finalize their version of the 10-year plan. They finished that work at the end of November. So today I'm just going to highlight what changed as a result of GASSET's work in November. First, I'm going to start with what has not changed. And our regional priority projects for this 10-year plan, which you all adopted back in March of 2023, including the Route 101 corridor study update in Bedford, the Exit 8 Wellington Road project in Manchester, and the intersection improvements at 107 Candia Road and Church Street in Deerfield. All of those were in the draft 10-year plan. All of those remain in GASSET's adopted version of the 10-year plan. There were no changes to any of the SNHPC's priority projects, so nothing to worry about there. This is one thing that GASSET did not change. When we last talked, we talked about the CMAQ projects being in something of a state of limbo. They were recommended for inclusion in the 10-year plan, but the GASSET Commission wanted to study those projects further before including them in the 10-year plan. Now they did include almost all of the non-electric vehicle CMAQ projects around the state in the draft 10-year plan. So those are in GASSET's version of the 10-year plan now, and those include all 4 of the non-EV CMAQ projects in the region. So the town of Bedford sidewalk on Old Bedford Road, phase 7 of the Londonderry Rail Trail, which is the final phase of the rail trail in Londonderry connecting to the Derrytown line, the Mammoth Road improvements in Manchester, as well as the state DOT's application for signal optimization on 3 corridors, 2 of which are in our region on 102 in Londonderry and 111 in Windham. All of those projects are now thankfully included in the 10-year plan as a result of GASSET's adoption in November. As a also, I don't know if Marcus Ponce de Leon is on the call today, but Marcus would be particularly interested in this, I know. All of the EV-related CMAQ projects around the state were in this kind of state of limbo as well, as DOT looked at ways of funding those projects through other sources of funding besides CMAQ, including the carbon reduction program. So there are a number of the EV-related CMAQ projects around the state that were voted to be included and are now in the draft 10-year plan, thanks to GASSET's adoption. So I'm going to just quickly note those. We talked about these in some detail earlier this year. The town of Bedford, this is actually an application from Revision Energy to install DC fast chargers at Hannaford store on Jenkins Road. That is now in the 10-year plan. Merchants Automotive application to install DC fast chargers at their automotive lot on Route 3 in Hooksett. That is now in the 10-year plan. The town of Londonderry, Nuria Energy, which is a gas station company, they have an application to install DC fast chargers at one of their stations at 174 Rockingham Road in Londonderry. That is now in the 10-year plan. Revision Energy's application to install DC fast chargers at Market Basket on Elm Street is now in the 10-year plan, as well as, again, Nuria Energy's second application in our region, which was to install DC fast chargers at 13 to 15 Rockingham Road in Windham, which is another one of their properties. There were two applications that were deemed to be ineligible under federal rules. Those were the town of Derry's application because it involved town fleet conversion. And there was a second application from Merchants Automotive for workplace charging at their headquarters in Hooksett that was also deemed to be ineligible. So other than those two projects, now all of the other 5 EV-related CMAQ projects are included in the 10-year plan. And again, I don't know if Marcus is on the call, but I'm sure he would be happy with that news that the EV projects are now incorporated. One of the
Nate, could I ask a question at this point?
Sure.
So with the town of Derry, we actually revised the CMAQ application back earlier in the year to take out the fleet conversion and only have level 2 and level 3 charging.
Okay.
So I'm not understanding the reason why it was deemed ineligible for funding.
I will. I'll check with DOT on that question. I don't know. In their list of projects that were not included, that project was not included. So we can check with them and see, if they're what their approach is going to be based on subsequent conversations they've had with the town of Derry. But let me just check.
Because in general, what I'm seeing
I'm going to
here
stop
is,
sharing briefly and just double check the 10-year plan.
what I'm seeing here on your list is that all these projects are commercial. Supermarkets, gas stations, and I'm surprised
For the EV ones,
that
yeah,
they
most
would
of the
have a priority over municipal. But
there were fewer municipal EV related applications in the CMAQ than there were non-EV ones. So Derry's projects in the approved the plan that's been submitted to the governor are the rail trail connection that was a TAP project funded a couple of years ago, the exit 4A obviously and its sub projects, and that's it. So there is not the EV related application is not yet in the 10-year plan, and like I said, we can check with DOT based on what the conversations were with the town, but that's not in the 10-year plan yet.
yeah, well, the reason listed is not valid, so.
Yeah, we could check with DOT and get further explanation on that. One of the biggest comments that were received throughout the hearings in our region, and it was one of the key themes in Goffstown's public hearing, was the delay to I-293 exit 6 and 7's project in the city of Manchester. As you might recall, there were some turnpike financial constraints that project was being delayed outside of the 10-year plan period. That received a lot of comments at the Goffstown public hearing in particular. And as a result of those comments, Gasset has endorsed the concept of issuing $50 million in turnpike bonding. And that would help to advance the exit 6 and 7 project to be completed within the 10-year plan timeframe. So in the Gasset approved 10-year plan, the reconstruction of exit 7 is now programmed to start in fiscal 29 and be complete in fiscal 31. And exit 6 will follow that starting in fiscal 31 and complete in fiscal 34. So the both exit 6 and 7 would be complete at the end of this 10-year plan period, which is 2034, which was not the case in the original draft 10-year plan. So that's a very positive development for the city and for our region that has been advanced. There's also an interim improvement project that was programmed 2 years ago in the 10-year plan. It is for on-ramp improvements at Eddy Road, not too far from our office, actually, where the mobile station is, and that ramp onto 293. Some safety improvements are going to happen in that area as an interim project before the exit 6 and 7 fully gets reconstructed. There were a couple of other minor project changes, those being particularly in the town of Bedford. There was a project that was, I would call it an emergent need on Nashua Road over Riddle Brook. There had been some stormwater issues, I think upstream of this location, and concerns about infrastructure resiliency and the ability of this particular culvert to handle stormwater. It needs to be upsized to a bridge structure to handle the water in Riddle Brook, and so it is now going to be included in the state aid bridge program and is in the 10-year plan programmed with state aid bridge program funding. So that was an emergent need that came in during the Gasset process, and Gasset accommodated the request of the town of Bedford to include that project, and we're happy they did. They also, Gasset, no surprise here, unanimously rejected and removed the proposed statewide project to convert to milepost-based exit numbering. This is a federal manual on uniform traffic control devices requirement. New Hampshire is one of the final states that has not implemented this yet for a variety of reasons. It comes up every 2 years in the 10-year plan cycle, and it has followed the same kind of pattern where it is removed by Gasset, and it is so it is not in the 10-year plan at this point, and no immediate plans, as far as I know, to convert to milepost-based exit numbering in New Hampshire. Next steps. So Gasset's approval of their version of the 10-year plan is not the end of the 10-year plan process. It is the 10-year plan now goes to the governor. The governor can make any changes to Gasset's version of the plan that he sees fit. He is required to finalize his version of the 10-year plan no later than January 15th. So
Nate, 1 second,
yeah.
we had a question over here.
Okay.
Nate, on that project that they rejected about signage and the numbering of the exit, what was the cost associated with that? Do you recall?
I can look it up.
2 million or 4 million or?
Yeah, I don't think it was that much. Let me just
okay.
Bear with me 1 second, and is that Peter?
Yes.
Okay, bear with me 1 second, and
I think
I
that's
will.
one of the silliest things that the state won't do. It's just ridiculous.
Let's see.
It's because of the Waterville Valley exit. Really?
Peter, it was originally proposed for construction in 2029 at a total cost of 1.309 million.
1.3 million.
They gotta give them something to vote no against.
I suppose.
Otherwise, the good ones will get.
Okay, Nate, you want to continue?
Thank you, Nate.
I will, yeah. Final slide. Are we back in full screen mode?
Good.
Yep.
Okay. So Gasset's version of the 10-year plan is now in the governor's hand. The governor will make any changes he sees fit, and he will finalize his version by January 15th. So we would expect to see his version of the 10-year plan coming in the next couple of weeks. And then the governor's version of the 10-year plan will move to the state legislature. It will start with the House Public Works and Highways Committee, then ultimately move on to the Senate, where it will be vetted by the Senate Transportation Committee. The state legislature can make any changes they see fit to the governor's version of the 10-year plan. Ultimately, the state legislature must approve their version of the 10-year plan by June 1st. And we would expect that that would happen. There are public hearings associated with the House Public Works and Highways Committee's review of the plan, as well as the Senate Transportation Committee's review of the plan. Typically, those would happen kind of in the beginning of February, mid-February timeframe. We don't know this cycle, but if passed as prologue, we would expect to see public hearings at the House level probably in February. And certainly we can let everybody know when that happens. So there is at least one more opportunity to have to have comments heard on the draft 10-year plan. So Jeff, going back to your question, that may be one avenue that you could consider as well, is the town of Derry talking with New Hampshire DOT about the CMAQ application in Derry that has, as I understand now, been revised through subsequent discussions. You could also talk with your state representatives in town, particularly any who may be on the House Public Works and Highways Committee, so that they can be aware of that discussion as the plan reaches their desk.
All right, thank you.
And that's it. That's all I had. I'm happy to answer any other questions. I think overall, the changes that were made by Gasset are quite beneficial to the region. Very happy to see exit 6 and 7 moved up. Very happy to see the CMAQ projects being incorporated. So those were all things we advocated for during the public hearing process, and Gasset listened. So the process worked well on that front.
Any questions for Nate in-house?
I have one.
Sylvia?
Nate, do we have any timeline? Maybe I missed it for the EV related projects.
Any timeline?
Yeah, like, do we know when they'll be installed? Like, is it gonna take?
Oh,
5
yeah,
years?
each project. So if you're interested in looking at individual projects and what their engineering and construction timelines are, the full 10-year plan Gasset version is posted on DOT's website. You can scroll to any particular project you're interested in and see what the engineering and construction schedules are for that particular project. The EV projects all vary. They have different construction years, probably based on DOT's discussions with the applicants. But yes, every project is different, and I would encourage everybody to do a full review of the 10-year plan on your own and zoom in on any projects that you are particularly interested in your community. And if you want to see full funding amounts and engineering and right-of-way and construction schedules, all of that it can be found in the full 10-year plan.
Any questions for those calling in? Not hearing anyone? Nate, thank you so much.
I guess I would just, Lucy St. John is on the call from DOT. Lucy, is there anything that I missed or that you would like to note from the department's perspective about the 10-year plan process?
No, Nate, Lucy St. John here. I think you did a great summary of it. And as you said, it's important that people realize that there's next step in the process. So if they have comments or whatever, to reach out to their legislative representatives and talk with them. And we can certainly get back with you on the questions regarding the dairy application. I do not know those specific details, but I will make others aware of the conversation today.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you, Lucy, on that. Okay, next item, Zach will be giving an overview on proposed 2024 safety performance targets.
So it's actually going to be Dave and I putting this together.
It helps if I turn the page.
No. You got the important one, so that's okay. See the let's see what the presentation was. The presentation level. between reading and slide view, that thing at the top, very top, the white thing. On the top. Over here, yeah, thank you. All right, can everyone see that at home?
It's still in PowerPoint
Yes.
view.
Oh, okay, sorry. Where you can switch it.
Now it's full screen.
Now it's full screen for you guys, but not for us.
Silly. That's okay, we could deal with it.
How about now?
Now it's in PowerPoint view.
How about now?
Still PowerPoint. Oh, now it's full screen.
Full screen, okay.
All right. Sorry about that. Hello, everyone. My name is David Tilton. Along with Zach, we're going to be presenting the 2024 PMI Safety Performance Measures. All right, so the FAST Act is continuing the work done by the Highway Safety Improvement Program to significantly reduce serious crashes and fatalities on all our public roadways. The fact that the FAST Act requires state DOTs to measure and report in the following areas: safety, pavement and bridge, system performance and congestion, freight movement, and congestion mitigation and air quality. Today, we're going to be talking about PM1, which has to do with safety. The PM1 safety performance measure targets are targets that are adopted annually every year. Some of the other ones, like pavement and bridge, are adopted every 2 to 4 years. So when we're talking about safety, these are the 5 safety measures that we're talking about: number and rate of fatalities, number and rate of serious injuries, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Each one of these is represented by a 5-year average. And these are the data points that Zach is going to be going into in more detail a little further into the presentation. So once the state sets their safety performance targets, then they're handed down to the MPOs. The MPOs then have a decision to make. They look at the state targets, they look at the data, and they have a decision to make to either support the state level performance targets or adopt a regional safety target. For 2024, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission has recommended adopting 4 out of the 5 state targets, with the exception to be, we would like to adopt a regional target for the fatality rate. Now, I should mention at the top of this presentation that today's presentation is informational only. We do not have to take any actions on these recommendations today. And now I believe this is, Zach will be going into some of the data.
Okay, so last year I went through and I did a background on crashes in our region, looking back about 10 years. So if you have not seen that, I recommend going looking at, it'd be about the same timeline last year. This year, I'm going to try to give us a more national and international context for some of this. So let me move some of these things. Mouse. Okay, I'm not gonna bother with that. So last year we saw 23 fatalities in our region and 124 serious injuries. You can see there that this fatalities skew towards motorcycle and pedestrian. There are way more of those two. Motorcycle make about 40% of our fatalities, and about pedestrians about 1 in 5 of all our fatalities. Fatal crashes in the region cost the region about 41 million in direct economic costs, and all total crashes would be about 250 million. So if you've been paying attention to the news, there have been a lot of stories over the last couple of years, especially the pandemic, about a rise in crashes and fatalities and crash rates and all that sort of stuff. And that is reflected in our data. So here we have the 5-year fatality rate in blue for us and for the United States in red. And for over the last 5 years, between 2014 and 2022, we saw an increase of 35%. The country as a whole saw 20. So remember, these are 5-year averages, so there's a bit of a delay there in terms of when stuff comes in. So you can see that it's like it bottoms out in about 2014, which means some of this started happening in 2015. So a lot of national transportation people are blaming this on, you know, the adoption of smartphones, because it came in about that time. And you know, that's so by that time, you know, you see much more distracted driving, but that really doesn't bear out in the get rid of this. And if we look at this in a, get rid of this. There we go. Sorry, people online, I'm trying to move some of this stuff from the screens. So if we look internationally, what we have here is road fatalities per 100,000 people. And these are for all the OECD countries with 10 million people. If you don't know what OECD is, it's an international organization of moderate to high income democracies for tracking stuff. And you can see that in 1995, the United States saw about 15.7 fatalities per 100,000 person. And, you know, other states like Portugal actually saw much higher. Some states like, Netherlands saw lower. As we move out to the 2020s and 2021, everybody else has seen major decreases. But about 2010, the United States rebounds and actually sees an increase between 2010 and 2020 to 21%, while the average for the rest of the group all declined by 28%. Well, you say, well, you know, the United States is not Netherlands. We're not ever going to be Netherlands. We're not going to be Dutch riding bicycles. But you know, if you look at Australia, it goes from 10 to 4.3. Canada goes from 11.3 to 4.6. The United States goes from 15.7 to 12.9. We are not even comparing with states that you would actually think we have a lot in common with in terms of our development and that sort of thing. And the United States is alone in this, with the one exception of Chile, which is kind of doing the same thing. Come on. Great. So, a sec.
Can you just use an arrow key?
No, because it's stuck on whatever it thinks. There we go. Okay, and so what's going on here? Here we have 3 columns looking at the United States, Netherlands, and Sweden, and the UK. And this is older data. This is about a decade old, so some of this might be a little dated. We do the indexed number at 100. So whatever the US rate is, 100. So if you have 50, that means your rate is half of what the US rate. For fatalities per million, that's the chart on the left. Fatalities per million motor vehicles, that's the one in the middle. Fatalities per billion miles driven. So even when we look at the number of miles driven, you would think the exposure, you know, you drive more, there's more chance you could crash. But we're even falling down way lower in that area. And it's been much worse actually for pedestrians. Between 2010 and 2021, pedestrian fatalities increased 3 times faster than overall. So you can see that we bottomed out in 2010, and now we're actually back to where we were in 1980. And it's even worse if we consider how much we walk compared to other countries. So this is the UK, Germany, Denmark, and Netherlands. Blue is 2002 to 2002. 2002. Green is 2016 to 2018. You can see that everybody decreased in the number of fatalities, but we're still way higher, up around, you know, over 10 compared to, you know, places like Germany or you know, the Netherlands. And it's actually become so bad that Federal Highways has had to take a real you know, tough stance on this. And I'm going to read this quote because this is from the Federal Highway Administration, you know, not Bike Walk America Alliance. The crisis of pedestrian fatalities on US roads cannot be solved in isolation. It is a result of decades of emphasis on motor vehicle mobility and access at the expense of all other modes. This emphasis causes negative outcomes, including vulnerable road user deaths and serious injuries, worsening air quality, inequitable access to opportunity, and low density sprawling development patterns. From the Federal Highway Administration. And this comes from a study where they compared it, pedestrian deaths in New Zealand and Australia to the US. You can see the US is the red there, and Australia and New Zealand are the other two. So what's going on here? Well, part of it is, and if you looked at some of the prior charts, it is that we drive more. Would you believe me if I told you that we now drive 80% more than we did in 1971 per person? Does that make sense? Would you think it's, we almost doubled during that time? Yeah.
Well, is that because people can afford more cars per family? So per person, there was less cars per people, right?
I don't know. It's just the number of times you were driving, the number of times cars drove a mile.
Okay.
Doubled. If you take all those divided by all the people, almost doubled.
Why isn't that the only statistic we're using for comparison of fatalities is miles per?
We did do that as well for some.
There was one of them.
There was one of them, yeah.
He thinks pretty good. Let's wait.
But if you can, because you want to say, well, per person, per vehicles, per miles, there are all these different statistics you can kind of look at. And the US, I'm saying New Hampshire during that same time period was about the same. You can see that so that's the chart on the right. We're tracing that pretty well. And we do see decreases, like obviously that on the left chart, that sharp decline is the pandemic, where it just drops down real quick fast. But otherwise, the only time we actually really see decreases is when there's increased price of gas. So the orange there and the legend on the, not the legend, but the scale, thank you. The scale on the right is the real dollar for a West Texas crude, a barrel, dollar per barrel. You can see anytime the price goes up, we see a decrease in the amount we're driving, with the exception of the pandemic. Another thing going on here, vehicles have changed a lot in this country. So we have black is all vehicles, blue is all cars, and red is all trucks. And trucks in this case includes SUVs and minivans. So you can see this is looking at weight, horsepower, acceleration 0 to 60, and percent of all the vehicles produced by the year that it was sold. So you can see that the oil crisis there is pretty obvious. So when you get into 1983, suddenly everybody's cutting the weight and the horsepower because the price of gas has gone up so much. But after that, for all these factors, weight, horsepower, the acceleration, the weight and power increase, the acceleration decreases, or the rate of acceleration decreases, and the percent of vehicles produced has changed, that now more trucks are produced than cars for the first time ever in the US. And what are the effects of this? Well, if in a crash involving two vehicles, a vehicle that's 1,000 pounds heavier is 40 to 50% more likely to kill the other occupant. An occupant in the car is 1.6 times more likely to die if the crash is another vehicle is a pickup truck versus another vehicle. The fatality rate for pedestrians hit by an SUV or pickup truck is 2 to 3 times higher than that for pedestrian cars, passenger cars. So all this is pretty gloomy news. That said, they are starting to do something about it. They have the Federal Highways, US DOT is starting to adopt the safe systems approach, which is something that other countries like Australia did 2 decades ago. And it's actually in the IIJA, they actually mentioned safe systems. And this does changing the idea to around certain principles such as deaths and serious injuries are unacceptable. Humans make mistakes. Humans are vulnerable. Responsibility is shared. Safety is proactive. Redundancy is crucial. And then a focus around safer people, safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer roads, and post-crash care. And let's take an example of safer speeds. This comes from New Zealand, but these are the different speeds that if you get hit, either a pedestrian is hit, or you're T-boned in an intersection, or a head-on crash, that you are 90% likely to survive. So if you were hit at 20 miles per hour, if I'm walking and I'm hit at 20 miles per hour, 9 times out of 10 I survived. But if a pedestrian is hit going at 35 miles per hour, it's 5 times as likely that I will die. And we can see this. This is Manchester crash data. So in Manchester between 2017 and 2022, bike ped crashes, there were 10 of them. Of those, 0 were fatal or serious. 11 happened on Bridge Street. Of those, about half were fatal or serious injuries. So we have a parking lot versus a road where the posted speed limit is 30 miles per hour.
Is that a total over 5 years, 10
Yes.
and 11?
Yes. So now that's context. I'm going to get us into what we're actually looking at today, where we've been, where we're going. This is the first measure. This is the number of fatalities, 5 years moving average. As I mentioned, we're up, from 2014, you can see that low. So we currently at a high of 21. These is the red are our different targets that we adopted. The crosses are what was actually, the crosses are the targets that we set. The red is the actual number of fatalities. So you can see that we were pretty close there for 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, we were pretty off. And we're currently on target, if this continues extrapolated from the 5-year target, to miss the state's target of 19.8. The second measure is fatalities per vehicle mile traveled. You can see again that we have historically been way below the state because we have less rural. You're more likely, we have higher BMT, less rural roads, safe in that case, safer roads in general. So we were being low, but we also saw a big spike as well as the state did. So now we're at a high of 0.787. We are currently on target to meet a regional target if we adopt a separate our own target. Previously, we had adopted 0.75, but since it's increased, we increased that the same amount that the state has, which brings it up to 0.795, and that puts us on target to meet that. The third measure is the number of serious injuries, 5-year moving average. In this, so in 2022, the 5-year average was 102.4. We're going down. Some of that we think is over time is a better reporting on what is an actual serious injury, but we can't really say. But we are seeing a little uptick. That said, we are still well on target to meet our measure of 1.05. You can see that again the X's are what we adopted, and the red is what we actually attained. The fourth measure, like you would see, we're tracking the state pretty closely here. So 5-year moving average, we're going down, but we're currently at 3.827, which is only slightly higher than the state. And likewise, we are on target to meet our target of 3.877. The last number is number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. You can see that we had a big bump there in in that period around 2017 prior. I don't know what happened, but there was a couple of really bad accidents and our numbers went really high. Again, these numbers are comparatively small, so it doesn't take much for them to, if you have an accident where 4 people are hit, that's something that can skew it really quickly. The good news is we're down. There's a little uptick though at 12.4 currently. And again, we're well on target to meet our target of 11.3. You can see that also there's a lot more variability here in terms of the targets and the actual numbers are attained. Again, they kind of bounce around just because the numbers are smaller and therefore there's more randomness to them.
Thank you, Zach. All right, this table here is a summary of what Zach just presented. We have the safety measures, the 5 safety measures over to the left, and this is at the state level, and we have the 2 most recent 5-year rolling averages, 2017 to 21 and 2018 to 22. To the right of the rolling averages, we have our recent and desired trends. The recent trend reflects the direction that the rolling averages are going. And as we can see here from the upward arrows in the red boxes, they're increasing in 4 or 5 of the state's measures. The desired trends are the direction we want to see these go down. We want to see the numbers reduced. We want to see a reduction in fatal and serious injuries on all our roadways. The silver lining is we have seen that in the state on the non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Hopefully this trend will continue and can spread to some of our other statewide measures. To the right of the trends are the state targets for 2024. These are at the decimal place because they are averages. And here we have a similar table that's showing the safety measures at the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission level. And we have our safety measures, our two most recent 5-year rolling averages, and our recent and desired trends. As we can see from the red boxes, we went up on all our 5-year rolling averages for the 5 safety measures. Not the direction we want to go, but hopefully we can reverse that trend. To the right of the trends are once again the state targets. And here are our recommended targets and actions. So once again, we are supporting 4 out of 5 of the state's targets. And we are suggesting adopting a regional target of 0.795 for the fatality rate. And here is a summary of what Zach showed before of how good we are at getting close to those the targets and the actual numbers. As you can see, there's a lot of variability. It is tough sometimes to pinpoint these numbers, especially with smaller sample size numbers, like the non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. But looking at the absolute relative difference and a big picture, I think we're getting a lot closer to narrowing the gap between the target and the actual. And this last slide is a summary of what we were talking about today. We have our safety measures. We have to the left of the 2024 column with the state targets. To the right of the 2024 is our regional targets and the actions that we would recommend. Once again, we're recommending supporting 4 out of 5 of the state targets and adopting a regional target of 0.79 for the fatality rate. And that is our presentation. Zach and I will try to answer any questions that may arise.
Questions for the gentleman in house? Yes, please.
The second slide that you showed cost impact. How is that calculated?
That is calculated, so that comes from a study from the National Injury Safety Council. I can't remember, but they calculated and they basically looked at certain things like, loss of wages, the direct property costs, the administration, all this sort of thing. So they list out a series of things that they can, directly say, okay, these things are, direct economic costs.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Actually, two comments and, sort of perspectives. One of the possibilities, Zach, you said, when smartphones,
screen share,
smartphones were introduced, that we didn't see the numbers go up in European countries.
It's the red stop share below.
Thank you.
One of the things that I had just seen in another report about this the other day is that in Europe, still 75% of cars are manual transmission. Right, and so many of those accidents we assume don't happen out on the highway, where someone would be going along in 50 or in their car, so in more densely settled areas, people in Europe are shifting and clutching a lot more and don't have both hands for.
As someone who's driven a manual now for more than a decade, I can say, it is easier to not be distracted, because if you're going to try to eat a hamburger while driving downtown, that doesn't quite work.
The other thing is, and it's sort of similar, there was a story in the New York Times the other day about time of day of accidents, and it's really hard to disaggregate. I don't know how the data come to you, but if it's possible to disaggregate them, that for non-motorized injuries, the deadliest or most injury prone time for pedestrians and cyclists is just at dark and in the few hours after. And that may well coincide with some of the other factors you talked about, about like rural roads and road safety and transportation systems being made to accommodate cars and not non-cars. But if possible, that for our region, that could be an interesting thing to disaggregate.
So we do have our numbers for that, and I can tell you that at least for fatalities, they're much more likely for pedestrian and bicyclists. They're much more likely when it just when it's dark in those first hours after.
Right.
It's right at like 6 o'clock. In the winter is when it happens. It's clear. It's very clear that it's visibility issues is a big component of it.
Are there any questions for those calling in? Not seeing any. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Is there any other business, Sylvia?
I actually have a question for the team. I don't know that anyone's happy to see those numbers going up. I mean, I remember this group having a conversation a year ago or 2 years ago, I'm not sure when it was. And we were unhappy then about not having improved targets. And to see this, you know, it's not improving. I'm just wondering, and also, it was very interesting to see Zach's quote from the Federal Highway Department, and I'm just wondering, is there anything like funding wise, can we expect different funding sources to perhaps get at this at a different angle, like behavioral, some program that might.
You mean like arresting people that drive without licenses and registration?
I don't know about that, but I just, educational programs about, driving while distracted or things like that. We haven't been able to do anything in those lines, and
I can tell you that a lot of this in other countries is through automated enforcement, both in terms of red lights, speeding, and they're figuring out now to do distracted. Because they're able to use AI and figure out when somebody's looking at their phone and stuff like that. And all of those are illegal in New Hampshire.
right,
Yeah, I'm not ready to go there.
right. We've had those conversations with Bike Ped, and I think, we've talked about the cameras that might be looking at traffic and able to do, ticketing.
Is there a breakdown of how many people are involved in fatalities that the driver wasn't licensed or registered or insured?
That I don't know. I do know that a lot of it is, drunk driving, a lot of it is speeding, a lot of it is not wearing your seatbelt, riding a motorcycle without a helmet, that sort of thing. I think last year we figured out that about half was motorcycle or people not wearing their seatbelts in the state.
Well, now, if you didn't have the interstate highway system, you wouldn't have a vehicle or a system that would allow people going 120 miles an
That's
hour.
true.
Yes.
Part of it is,
Culture.
vehicle that, that you can drive 120 miles per hour.
We have a different culture than the
Anyway.
Netherlands, Sweden, and Britain.
Could I have a motion to adjourn the MPO, please?
So moved.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, it's unanimous that we adjourn. I'd like to call to order the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. Could I have a motion to approve the minutes of November 28th, 2023?
So moved.
Is there a second? Second. Any corrections or omissions from calling in or in the room? Okay, Sylvia, do you want to do a roll call on the approval of minutes?
I do. Thanks, Lucy. So I'm not sure if everyone's still here. And I did notice that our friend Mark Sunan showed up, I think sometime in the middle of that whole thing. So I will be including you, Mark. But let's start with Bedford. Is Bill Jean still here? Did Bill have to go? It looks like Bill had to go. So not in this one. Chester still in house. Andrew Haddock.
President, yes.
And Deb Munson.
President, yes.
From Deerfield, we have Fred McGarry.
Present and yes.
Errol Rhodes.
Yes.
From Derry in-house, we have Richard Tripp.
Yes.
And online, we have Jeff Moulton.
Here and yes.
And John O'Connor still here.
Here and yes.
Thanks, John. From Francestown, we have Linda Kuhnhart.
Present and yes.
And Gary Schneckenberg.
President, yes.
And is Jennifer Vadney still with us? Yes.
Yeah, present and abstain.
Thank you. Goffstown in-house, we have Barbara Griffin
Present, yes.
and Jacob LaFontaine.
President, yes.
Thank you. In-house from Hooksett is Denise Pitchett Folk.
Present, abstain.
From Londonderry, Art Rugg.
I'm present and yes on the minutes.
Manchester in-house, Peter Capano.
Present, yes.
Ray Clement,
Present, yes.
Dan O'Neill.
Present, yes.
From New Boston, we have Mark Sunan.
Here and yes.
Thanks, Mark. Still no one from Ware, but from Wyndham in-house, we have Peter Griffin
Present, yes.
and Ed LaPointe.
Present, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, first item on the agenda, Sylvia, do you?
Oh, Jeff Penta. I am so
Sorry,
sorry.
I also came in the middle of that presentation, so I will present and abstain.
Thank you so much. Anyone else I missed? Okay,
Sylvia, do you want to introduce our guest?
I do. Are we lucky today? So today we have Christina Fitzpatrick, the director of New Hampshire's AARP. You all know that we've had a wonderful relationship with New Hampshire AARP for years and visited every single community in our region talking about age-friendly communities and really got a fairly good snowball going, so to speak, about talking about how it is to create age-friendly communities, and all kinds of things have happened since then. And I was lucky enough to convince Christina to come join us today and sort of give us an update on what's happening, what are the trends with age-friendly work, with policies that impact older adults, and that sort of thing. So without any more, take it away, Christina.
Is it okay if I stand up? Will that work?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Well, hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. My name again is Christina Fitzpatrick. I'm the state director for AARP in New Hampshire. I am relatively new to this role. I started the job last August and I moved to New Hampshire for this job. I had been working in the AARP national office in Washington, DC for 15 years before this and had focused on public policy. So for my whole career, I've worked on issues related to retirement savings, retirement income, like Social Security, budget policy, tax policy, workforce policy. And I was really glad to have this opportunity to move into this role as state director, because it's a broader portfolio and the state office work is closer to the ground than what happens in Washington, DC. So just to give you a little overview of what AARP New Hampshire does, because that's not apparent to everybody. We do a lot of advocacy work, mostly at the state level, but sometimes in communities. We do a lot of education. So we have a lot of programming that is available to help people learn about how to prevent, how to not fall victim to fraud, for example. And then we also have a lot of just programming that's always tied to something that's social mission oriented, but can be just fun. So last Friday, I think we had an event that was both virtual and in person for building terrariums, which got rave reviews, which I was not expecting. I can't say that terrariums really do it for me, but the people loved it. And so it's an opportunity for people to come together, talk to other people who share interests, and just have a little break and a little fun. We're a small staff in New Hampshire, so we have 5 people, and we also have a cadre of volunteers. So we have 130 volunteers around the state. Most of them are concentrated in Manchester, the Manchester area, Concord area, and in the Seacoast, and they make all these events possible. So we can be out in the community and have more of an impact because of the volunteers. And they're an enthusiastic bunch who really enjoy volunteering with us. So that's one of my favorite parts of the job, is interacting with these folks who are really excited about AARP's mission and excited about being out in the community and trying to improve the lives of people in New Hampshire. And that is one focus of AARP is to improve the communities in which we live, to make them better places to live and age. You've probably heard about our Community Challenge Grant program. Is that something that's familiar to people?
We send that around every year.
Yeah. So that is something, this year we accepted 49 applications for a project throughout the state. We were able to award 7 grants to 7 projects. And I'm really glad. I think we've been doing this program for about 10 years. So there are some towns that have had multiple grants. So they've had a plan for how to have a project that's in multiple stages, and we've been able to fund those stages. So we've been able to see the growth of those projects. And that's really means a lot to me. What I'd like to do today is talk to you a bit about some of the framing that we have for our work going forward, and then what that means in terms of AARP's work, and some of which you might be interested in for yourselves. So AARP is focused now a lot on supporting family caregivers. We define family caregivers they are people who are caring for adults with health conditions. So that might be an adult child, a spouse, a parent, a relation, or just, a friend in the community who somebody has taken responsibility for in some way. They perform a variety of tasks, from going to the grocery store to wound care. It's a whole gamut. And also involves coordination of services, fighting with insurance companies. It's a whole lot of different kinds of tasks. And it's really important as a society for us to realize how important these family caregivers are, because they're the ones that are left holding the bag. When the rest of the system breaks down, the family caregivers are the ones who are left to fill in the gaps. And we did a study that showed that there are about 168,000 family caregivers in New Hampshire, which is almost 20% of adults in this state are caring for someone else. If you consider people who have had these responsibilities in the past, or who anticipate having them in the future because of the aging parents, whatever, you get up to like 70–75%. And then there are all of us, if we live to a ripe old age, are going to need care. And even if we don't, like when you talk about somebody having a health condition that puts them in the hospital and they get discharged, they need help. So I have a friend whose father developed sepsis, was in the hospital for weeks. He was discharged to a rehab facility, was there for 48 hours until they decided he was well enough to go home. But he was sent home before grab bars could be installed or things like that. He ended up falling a couple times, needing stitches, it would have been good for a nurse to be able to come in and assess his medications, and because they finally figured out that that's what was causing his dizziness. So the system isn't well set up to help manage those kinds of acute crises or chronic conditions. We know that 60% of family caregivers are employed, so they are trying to manage both their work life and these new family responsibilities. We know 30% of family caregivers have a child in the home. So this is what some people call the sandwich generation, where they are caring for the younger generation and maybe the older generation at the same time. And these folks on average are spending 18 hours a week providing this care. And on average, the ones who have costs, who are spending out of pocket, they are an average spending $7,000 a year. So these are major commitments that have really significant effects on people's financial security, not just because of what they're paying, but also because some of them are losing income. They're cutting back on hours. Some people are leaving the workforce entirely to provide care. And it's an emotionally draining experience, because you're thrust into this role that you're not prepared for and there's not enough support for. AARP's membership, our constituency, are people aged 50 and older. So caregiving is one of those things that really hits people across our membership. So your people in their 50s and 60s are more likely to be care providers, people in their 80s and 90s more likely to be care recipients, but it's not age specific. It's really about your time of life. So that's all background to explain why we think family caregivers and focusing on their needs is so important. There are a lot of different ways that we can support family caregivers, and making it easier for people to age in place, to age at home, or to age in their caregiver's home. That is one way to really help family caregivers and really make it possible for people to fulfill what they want. They want to age at home, or they want to age in a home, not in a long-term care facility. And because of the way that New Hampshire structures its payments for healthcare services and long-term care services, we rank 49th in the country for the, if you look at the percentage of spending that goes to nursing home care versus home and community-based services, we rank 49th, with only 14% going to home and community-based services. There's a lot of public policy that kind of added together conspires to make that the case. We are grateful in that there was a lot of work that was done in the last legislative session to try to address this problem, try to make things better for family caregivers, make it easier for people to age at home. So there's the Aging and Disability Resource Centers across the state that people call Service Link, where people can call in to find out what services are available. Unfortunately, a lot of the time the answer is none, sorry, because the demand so far outstrips supply. But those services received a boost. There are plans in place that the Department of Health and Human Services, there's a schedule for them to take some steps that they need to take to improve this situation of the 14%. So they need to get some waivers from the federal government, and there are other steps that they will take that will improve the situation. Also, in the last session's budget, there was a big increase in reimbursement rates for Medicaid providers, the providers of services that are funded by Medicaid, which hopefully will address some of the workforce issues that everybody is talking about, that it's hard to find workers to provide the services that are needed. So there's good news that there was work done, a lot of hard work that was done with a coalition of advocacy groups, people in government, service providers to come together to make those improvements. So there's a lot that can be done on the healthcare angle, long-term services and supports, and all that can encompass. There are also things that we can do that I think are more relevant to your world in terms of making communities stronger and making it more possible for people to stay at home even when they develop some challenges and some limitations. The Census Bureau did a study about age readiness of homes that you may have seen. New England ranks is the region with the lowest percentage of homes that are age ready. And part of that definition is there a bedroom and a bathroom on the first floor? Is there a zero entry bathtub? I think that's one of them. Anyway, they had a definition of that. Houses in New Hampshire, only about 20% of them are rated age ready. Whereas some regions like the Southeast tend to be more like 50%. And I think that's probably just due to the aging housing stock in New England, which is the oldest region in the country. We also know that people can be stuck in their homes, that because they would like to move to a smaller place or to a place that's closer to the hospital, doctor's offices, grocery stores, whatever, but they can't because they're worried about housing prices. And if they've been in their home for a long time, they worry if they sell it, they're going to have difficulty finding a new place without increasing their costs substantially. We have just commissioned a survey. I got the preliminary results last Friday, And that's one of the things that we saw is when you ask people, what if you wanted to move, what are you worried about? And one of the things, a couple of the things were related to cost and affordability. And so that's really high on people's minds, which may not be surprising given how much attention has been paid to housing affordability in the past year. But that was a striking finding to me, as was from my preliminary read of the data, that people, when you ask them to think ahead to when they will be like past normal retirement age and what they're concerned about, there's a lot of concern about financial issues and a lot of concern about housing and housing affordability. There's less concern about transportation and less concern about social connection. And again, maybe that's not surprising. However, it's surprising to me somewhat because everybody, I think, like knows what it's like or can anticipate what it's like to have an older family member where you have to have that conversation about you're not safe to drive anymore. And lacking that independence is just crushing for some people, and hard to remedy. We know that it's a challenge, especially in the rural area, but also in more urban areas. So we had a volunteer who, she and her husband had a lot of health issues at the same time this fall. They live in Dover, so a fairly built up area, and they had a horrible time trying to find transportation when neither of them were cleared by doctors to drive. They would try to arrange for transportation services that wouldn't show up. They had, they're relatively new to the area, so they didn't have a big network of friends who could help them. And so she talked about how they got in the car and drove sometimes when they really shouldn't have, because they didn't have an alternative for getting to the doctor. So that's housing and transportation. The third area I want to talk about is access to high-speed internet. So that is also something that AARP has been focused on more in the past year or two, because having access to high-speed internet can open up a lot of opportunities. So it can help to provide access to healthcare providers, so you don't have to go to the doctor to get your your blood pressure monitored or other things. You can do some things from home, have home appointments. I know I've taken advantage of that. And it's just super convenient. So it can help with healthcare. It can help with social isolation so that you can connect to your family. During the COVID pandemic, I started doing video calls with my parents who are in Louisiana. And it's been marvelous in terms of having a stronger connection than just through phone lines. And you can do things like get your groceries delivered, things like that. So if you have access to high-speed internet, there are some possibilities that are available to you that aren't available otherwise. We know that there's a huge difference in the percent of people who have high-speed internet in their homes based on age. So for people below the age of 65, about 3/4 have high-speed internet in their home, whereas people 65 and older, only 58% do. So there's a gap there, and some of that is about access. Like, can they pay for high-speed internet? Like, is the infrastructure there? And too often in New Hampshire, the answer is no. Now, there are different ways to make internet access meaningful. You have to have more than just the wires in the ground. People need to have a device. They need to know how to use that device, and it needs to be affordable. If you can think about, like, on a screen, when you go to a website, sure, all of you know that if you see 3 lines in a row, which some people call a hamburger, you know that you can click on that and get kind of a menu of sites within that page, or pages within that site. If you've never been online before, trying to use a mouse is crazy. Like getting used to the idea that what you do with your hand is what's going on the screen. There are all these things that we all take for granted that if you've never had a computer before, or if you haven't had a smartphone before, there's a lot that's intuitive to all of us that isn't if you're brand new. And that's the human component that we need to pay attention to. Now, there are hundreds of millions of dollars that are coming into the state from the federal government to help address both the infrastructure and these more human elements that are so important, especially when you're talking about an older population. So I've covered now why AARP is focused on family caregiving, and what we know is the prevalence of family caregiving in this state and what their needs are. Talked about some of the ways that we can fulfill those needs through improving access to healthcare and long-term care, and improving the livability of communities through housing, transportation, and access to high-speed internet. So now I'd like to talk to you about AARP's work in these areas that we're projecting for 2024, and then would love to hear take questions and hear about what kinds of things you're thinking about for 2024 and where there might be some overlap. So in terms of support for family caregivers, when I referred earlier to the work that we accomplished in the state budget during the last legislative session, there is a lot that's in place and a lot that will be built out over the next few years. So making sure that what has been promised is implemented is the primary job of advocates in this area right now. So we'll be spending time on that. We will, in terms of support for family caregivers, we'll provide educational opportunities. So for example, there is something called, an organization called New Hampshire, Assistive Technologies, New Hampshire Assistive Technologies, that help people have tools that they need to be able to age in place. And when this person is talking technology, she's not just talking about something that you can control from your smartphone. It's also just devices that can help somebody continue to live independently, that feed themselves even if they have a lot of arthritis, get dressed, do other things that make it possible for them to not be completely dependent on other people. So we're planning to have a webinar with her where she can introduce people to the work that she does, because they have a library of these devices that people can borrow and try, so that you don't have to invest a lot before you know if something's going to work. We want to provide opportunities for caregivers to get a break, because having respite is very difficult. It's hard to find somebody to come into your home and provide care for the person that you are taking care of. But if we can provide some amount of respite just through like a distraction in terms of terrarium building with the supplies, that can be useful as well. We're also going to be working with employer groups to help them understand how they can help and support the 60% of family caregivers who are still in the workforce. So they can provide more flexible use of sick leave, for example, so that people can use that not just for their own illness, their own doctor's appointments, but for the illness or appointments for their loved one. We are taking a look at, there are some bills in the legislature that have been filed around accessory dwelling units, zoning reforms. There's a lot of work going on this year around the healthcare workforce and trying to attract and retain people in that workforce. For high-speed internet, to get these federal funds that I mentioned before, New Hampshire has had to create plans, official plans, to submit to the federal government to say this is what we will do with the tens of millions of dollars that you have allocated for us. The plan, the digital equity plan, is the one that addresses the human factor. How do we get people devices and training? And how do we make sure that the access is affordable? That plan will be released by the Bureau of Economic Affairs they're projecting January 2nd, with then a 30-day comment period following. So if high-speed internet is something that you are focusing on at all, I encourage you to look into that and see if what the state is proposing makes sense to you, or you have suggestions for how to improve it. finally, I want to let you know about something that I'm involved with now called the Multi-Sector Plan on Aging. This is something that's being spearheaded by the Commission on Aging. And it is a model that it has different states are participating in across the country. So there are about 5 that have plans in place, 5 that are kind of on the road, and then about 5 like New Hampshire, where we're just at the very beginning. And these are plans that are a 10-year blueprint for restructuring the way that services are offered and convening and aligning the stakeholders to make sure that the people who should be talking to each other are talking to each other. And you know something about that from this commission work of bringing people together to try to take advantage of opportunities to coordinate, for example. It involves people both within the government and outside of government, so can really help to promote public-private partnerships. And the idea is to create a coordinated system to promote healthy aging, independent living, and social engagement. And importantly, we want to focus not just on the needs and demands of an older population. We know the population in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine, especially, are aging quickly. And it can be easy to just focus on the burden on the healthcare system and things like that. But there are also really a lot of benefits to having an older population that we can take advantage of. So all these volunteers that I was talking about with AARP, almost all of them are retired. And they have chosen to try to fill their lives with purpose. And they do it this way, and we couldn't do our work without them. So I'm going to end there. We have other items on our agenda, but I think those are the ones that are most important for family caregivers and most relevant to kind of livable communities work that all of you.
Any questions for Christina in-house? Yes.
What was the high-speed plan that's gonna be released, or how do I look it up?
It's called the Digital Equity Plan.
Okay.
Have
And-
sent out information on
I
that.
probably already have it. Or like
You may
link-
have it, and we also requested volunteers to be part of, I think it was like a review committee or something like that, and we did have one person, I think it's Danielle Ivanzik, I think from Bedford, volunteered. I didn't hear any more after that, but yeah. If you Google that, or Google the stuff I send you out,
Okay, I'll try to look at.
do a
but it's
search
called-
on it.
It's called the Digital
Whatever.
Equity Plan, but it's the New Hampshire, or just if, like, what do I type in? Digital Equity Plan and it will come up?
If
You know
you
what I mean?
type in Digital Equity Act in New Hampshire,
Okay.
other words that you could use,
Something like that.
Bureau of Economic Affairs, and
Yeah,
the person in the government who's in charge of it is Matt Conservo.
I usually wear out trying to guess the words to type in.
You have a question.
Hi, thank you. So at the outset, you said something about 168,000 people. How do you survey? How do you survey members only? I mean, what's the mechanism for you to gather statewide data?
We do survey, we commission surveys with the sample size large enough for us to be able to make valid. Extrapolation, thank you. About the state of the whole. I don't remember if this survey, most of the ones we do, I think, are both online and phone. So we're trying to reach people in different ways.
So you're not restricting your data gathering to members only.
Right.
Okay. And how do you advertise the services of AARP? Are you restricted to service link type vehicles?
No, we have a website and we have social media. We have email addresses so we have 215,000 AARP members in the state, and we can connect with them in different ways. So we have email addresses for some, phone numbers for some, mailing addresses for all. So we can connect with them in various ways. And then we advertise in different newsletters and things like that.
Yes, Sylvia.
I have a quick question. Last week, Christina and I were at the Alliance for Healthy Aging quarterly meeting, and one of the speakers talked about adult daycare centers. And I don't know if you remember that, it was staggering that, I think, and I'm guessing now with, I'm using my, the P brain and seeing if I can remember the numbers, but I think there were 12 in the state and like now 5 have had to close or some numbers. I'm gonna say that's close to the ballpark. And I'm just wondering from you, Christina, can you tell us, you know, back with the caregivers, those facilities are so critical. I think there was, there's one in Manchester and one in Salem, so as close to our region as we can get. But certainly, I'm guessing not enough for the need, and I'm wondering if your group is involved in trying to help support that, or what might be happening there.
We know that there was some, in the news just probably a month ago, there was news about, one provider who operates 3 adult daycare centers closing, and the state was working with them to try to figure out how to place all the people who use that facility on a regular basis. And as you said, there's no good, they can try, but the capacity just isn't there. So that's not something that AARP is directly involved with. So we would focus more on the policy aspects of trying to make sure that there is funding in place, that there's infrastructure in place, if there are impediments to opening an adult daycare center. So we would address more of those systemic issues than the sort of on the ground.
You had one question?
What's your contact information? Was that in the stuff that you sent out?
It was.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, and I have business cards and happy to send out.
One last question in-house, and then I'll have to see if anyone is calling in.
I got two. Can I grab two? One quick.
Okay.
Christina, you used the word or the phrase numerous times, age at home, and then there was another point you said, age at a home. Does that mean the first one is age at their own home and maybe age at a family member's home?
That's what I intended, yeah.
Okay. And then just because we went through this in a family situation recently, what's the role of the VA with all this?
They have their own separate system that provides healthcare and provides support to vets. And just with every other aspect of the healthcare system, the need exceeds the supply of services.
And then this is just for any of you that are veterans. I had a 92-year-old uncle. He could not qualify for VA at home care because he didn't have a VA primary care doctor. And they would not accept his own primary care doctor. So just follow up, because this is important for people, the family veterans. Get a primary care doctor at the VA, even if you only see him or her once a year. That qualifies you for VA benefits.
I live in a senior housing. There's one, and I'm gonna shut myself off in a minute. There's a woman who fell. She went to rehabilitation. She had 2 insurance companies that somehow came into the picture. One of them had precedent over the other and said she has to go home. And that she's not ready to go home. Her daughters know. Anyway, are there any questions from those individuals calling in? No, not seeing it. Christine, this was so informative. Considering New Hampshire, I think after Maine is the second oldest state in the country, we're reaching crisis situation. And I hope the right people will realize that.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I've enjoyed being here.
Thank you so much.
Great job. Thank you.
Okay, Suzanne.
Okay, I think this is our last item under new business for the year. We're gonna be asking the commission today to authorize Sylvia to enter into contract with the Francestown Conservation Commission, so we can support them in updating their natural resources inventory and their conservation plan. So this is a conversation we've been having with Betsy Hardwick. I think Linda raised the issue for us a couple of months ago that this was an opportunity where we could offer some support. And basically, we've been talking to her and identifying that there is a lot of on the ground local expertise. There's a volunteer work group who's really ready and excited to dive in. But what they need from us is really targeting our kind of data analysis and mapping skills. So I'm looking to Zach here. So we, in collaboration with Betsy, we put together a scope of work. It will last about 10 months. But in your packet, you'll see a contract that is for all of 2024, just to allow for a little wiggle room in case it takes time to ramp up or wind down. And the total amount of that contract is $15,000. So that's the big picture. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions in-house for Suzanne? Questions from those calling in? Okay, could I have a motion then to authorize our executive director to enter in the Francestown Natural Resources Inventory and Conservation Plan?
I'll move that, Mr. Chairman.
There was second.
Discussion on the motion. Discussion on the motion.
Please go right
Do I
ahead.
have to recuse?
No.
Okay, good.
You don't want to discuss. Okay, be that way.
That was the discussion. It's my town. Can I vote for
Seriously though,
myself?
I'm looking at the witching hour of 1 o'clock and I value your time. Anyone calling in that would like to ask Suzanne a question? Yes?
Do we have the money?
You're getting
Money
paid
is
it.
For them to pay us.
Oh, they're gonna pay
Yeah.
it. Oh, they're paying us, that's the best thing.
Well, fitting the holiday season, if you'd like to make a general donation.
Well, I'm waiting for the Windsor number to.
Okay.
Foundation.
What's that?
Sustainability and HPC funding.
Yes, okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Okay,
Calling in, can you raise your hand?
got a thumbs up and a hand from Jeff.
Look at, and a forehead.
Okay. Any in opposition?
That would be you, Mr. Bowman.
Any abstentions? It is in the affirmative. Okay. Other business, Sylvia.
Happy holidays. Be safe, be healthy. Thank you so much for all your time.
Thank you very much for lunch.
Yes, thank you. Good.
Commissioner insights. Come on, now's your last shot at the end of the year. No one has insights, okay.
Well, thank you guys for doing a good job again.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure serving with you this past year. I hope everything goes well for holidays for you and for your new year. Could I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, raise your hands. Opposed?
I really like,
It fails, you're stuck in that.
I like those a lot. It's the first one I've encountered.
What's that?
Oh, yeah.
I like it. They fit my finger.
I'm glad you said so. Nate hates them.
I like them.
I love that they're not gonna last forever.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They don't offend me like those nasty plastic.
I hate the plastic. I wash them.
You wash these?
I wash the plastic.
Oh, yeah, I do that too. Yeah.